In 3 days, the Reframing Migrants in the European Media project will come to a close with a huge gathering of media makers from all across our continent. On May 12th, at Pakhuis de Zwijger, they will present a magazine called Shift, presenting proposals for the development of the European public sphere, inclusive to the perspectives of refugees and migrants. The magazine has been published by Here to Support and Hostwriter. In the upcoming half an hour, I will have a conversation with Osama Elsayad and Mohamed, who both participated in the EU-funded program Reframing Migrants in the European Media and contributed to Shift magazine. In the publication section of this dedicated Europe Day website, you can find a digital version of Shift magazine. And you can also come to Pakhuis de Zwijger on May 12th in person to get your physical copy. And I'm glad to have both Osama and Mohamed in the studio with me here. Could I ask you guys to just do a little introduction of yourself to the audience online and tell me and the audience in what way did you participate in the project?
My name is Osama Elsayad. I'm an Egyptian investigative journalist. I'm working on the investigations field for more like 6 years. I produced lots of investigations about like human rights violations and also the stolen assets and corruption in the Middle East. I have participated like in this project since the last year that it started. We have like this workshop, several workshops in Madrid. About the project Reframing Migrants in the European Media, and I was involved in a workshop that made a test for the newsrooms, like anti-racism test. Mm-hmm. So that was my first participation in this project. Then I was a part of the editorial team for Shift magazine, and I was one of the editors who was like working on the content of this magazine for 3 weeks, and we were also after that, we collecting the data and the content together into this magazine Shift.
Amazing, and we're going to be talking about Shift later on.
Sure.
What about you, Mo?
My name is Mohamed Ba, and I'm from Guinea-Conakry, West Africa, beautiful country. I'm the founder and host of the City Rights Radio. And in this project, Reframing Migrants in European Media, I was working on the podcast. We did a lot of podcast episodes on the different city assemblies that were held. And I would like to say it was quite an interesting experience, and I'm really proud of it.
I'm glad to hear that. And could you maybe share a bit more about the podcast? Where can we listen to it, for instance?
First of all, if you want to listen to the podcast, the most convenient would be to go on SoundCloud. Yeah, and search ECF Sounds, and we have the episodes there. Or you can go on Spotify and ECF Sounds also.
What would be the title of podcast if I were to look it up on my phone?
My favorite title so far is the one that we made where we introduced the project, and it is called Nice to Meet You Too. Because we choose this title because we've been talking a lot about the Reframing Migrants in European Media, going from places to places, but we never got to introduce ourselves and the project to the audience. So for the first time, we introduced who's Barley, who's Mohamed, and we named the episode "Nice to Meet You Too." It was kind of fun. I liked it.
That's a very cute name for the episode. Yeah. And I was wondering, could you tell people more about what places you went to with the podcast?
So for the podcast, I was fortunate. I went to Lampedusa, to Barcelona, and it was quite an interesting experience because prior to going to Lampedusa, I was like, I have to go to Lampedusa. I need to Google the place to see what to expect. And then, to my surprise, everything that I saw, everything that I read was quite negative when it came to migrants. Only to go there and realize that what I was expecting, what was told on media and websites, was totally different from what I saw, which actually motivated me more to work on the podcast, because it was supposed to be one episode that turned out to be 3 different episodes, because there was so much that was not told. There was so much that was not stated out there. So little information. And sorry to say this, but mainstream media has gone beyond borders to make sure that everything about Lampedusa seems so pessimistic, so negative, and talking about migrants in a really, really inhuman way. Uh, I had to go to Lampedusa to make the podcast, but when I went there, it became a motivation from seeing that this is not at all what is going on from what I saw online. So that motivated me even more, and that led to 3 different episodes being made out of from Lampedusa. I also went to Madrid, where we made another episode called the Soul's Table and Spaces, because this was how the assembly in Madrid was organized into 3 different tables. I'm not going to do spoiler alerts because it's yet to be published. But it was interesting, and for me, I think what I try to do with this podcast is to go against the fundamental approaches that many mainstream media are having, which is to cut your words to suit a narrative that they want to share, which is not what I want to do. I want to tell people stories to the full, what they say, how they want it to be, give migrants the space to get themselves out there.
It's great and very empowering and enabling people's capacity to express themselves. That's a very honorable way of making a podcast. And I was wondering, why do you think it's important to have like these other types of reports, such as the one that you've made in Lampedusa, in the media sphere?
Many times, this is a very sensitive topic, but it would be very weird for a man to sit on a table and talk about issues affecting women. I think it is also weird for a non-migrant to sit on a table to talk about issues affecting migrants.
Absolutely.
There are people that have PhDs, there are people that can speak, and in my humble opinion, I believe communication is just the essence of sharing message. Even if I cannot speak English properly, I can utter a few words for you to understand. So I don't see the need for someone that is not a migrant, that have not experienced being a migrant or the difficulties that comes with it, to tell the stories of a migrant. It doesn't make sense. I think grassroots media organizations like the City Rights Radio should be empowered to encourage people and itself empower people to tell their stories, because we can tell our own stories. And if we tell it, we always tell it better. Because if we do, you see the human connection. This creates empathy, and empathy, hopefully, will create change. And
Absolutely.
I believe that's it.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Mo. And I think I had another question, but this was so good that I'm a bit dumbfounded. But what would be like the main learning from the process? What did you learn from making this podcast?
What I learned, I'm going to tell it in the form of an anecdote if we have time, I don't know. But when I went to Lampedusa to record the episode, I said this in the podcast also, but I'll do it again. I had to interview the survivors of the 3rd of October 2013 boat wreck. And I myself came to Europe on a boat. So I knew the subject that I was talking about. I knew how I feel when people ask me about my boat experience, so on and so forth. So I knew what were some of the trigger questions, what to ask, how to ask it, how to be responsible and respectful, not to ask questions just to kind of like enrich your content, you know? I went to the survivors. I was like, hey, I don't feel comfortable asking you questions because I know how I feel when people ask me, but what would you like to tell?
Yeah.
And he shared as much as he wanted or as little as he wished. So basically, because I am a migrant, because I understand the situation that I was talking about, it made the approach more human and gave control to the person that was being interviewed. And I think that's why we need to have more migrant people, journalists with migration backgrounds in all forms of media.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's the answer. I think that's the best I can give, because it is very important to tell a story, but it's also very important to be respectful and be considerate of the people that you're interviewing, the people whose stories you're sharing. It's a huge responsibility, guys.
Absolutely. And it's so easy to just cross the line and for your story to become exploitation of somebody's pain and experience.
And it happens a lot.
Sadly. But speaking of multimedia, the project Reframing Migrants also created a beautiful publication. And we are going to play a little video for you about the making of Shift magazine, if it's possible. Awesome, thank you.
My name is Tina Su, and I'm a multimedia journalist based in Berlin.
This is Mahmoud Lanani. I'm an Egyptian journalist and documentary producer.
I'm Vivian Muhle, and I work and live in Hamburg, Germany as a creative.
And I'm Ariel Sosa, and for this project I am the designer, and in my normal life I am a father.
My name is Osama Elsayad, I'm investigative journalist.
My name is Moha Jereo. I'm a journalist based in Madrid. I mostly focus on race and migration.
I'm Gabriela Ramirez. I am a multimedia journalist from Venezuela based in Berlin, and I'm the head of data and multimedia at Unbiased News.
So we are in the Reframing Migrants project, trying to change the narrative and the perspectives about the migrants, refugees, and racialized people.
So around a dozen of us are here together in Amsterdam for 2 weeks to do this kind of experiment of a decolonizing newsroom.
We're trying to practice a new practice of a newsrooms that have different type of approach. A newsroom that doesn't belong to the mainstream.
Working together on a 80-page magazine.
We are interviewing founders, co-founders, media makers, media initiative, most of them led by migrants, refugees, and the diaspora.
To see examples of people who have kind of reclaimed the narratives for themselves by creating their own newsrooms, by creating their own podcasts, or creating their own like TikTok channels and new media to change the narrative around migration.
It's getting their insight to see how we can just amplify their voices, help the media landscape.
We have like a small community, like we see their practices, we see how they are really changing the scene, the coverage for the migrants issue, how they choose their topics. It's not the traditional way.
Our work in decolonising the newsroom in Madrid, where we work on this anti-racist media test and anti-racist newsroom test.
So we hope that what we create is something like a toolbox. It's a set of like best practices, recommendations, and examples that people can apply in their own newsrooms and their own like journalistic practices.
Welcome everybody to the second editorial meeting. Oh yeah, thanks for progress.
Yeah. Trying to set up a decolonising newsroom.
And what this means is something that we are exploring together.
I think it should be free, diverse, unbiased.
And working with an anti-racist and migrant perspective.
What is knowledge? Who is an expert? What is relevant?
I think this is all related with how we do the work we do.
A newsroom has different point of view, different perspective. Not also our practice, but also other practices that reflects the values.
For the second group, to give perspective, and I wrote specifically on how they can improve professionally and economically by reaching a new audience. I think that's a perspective.
Both of us are working with Julia on deciding the visual aspects of the magazine.
Like showcase or show the diversity of the topic, not only represented in the people, but also in the colors and the textures.
Shift. Actions for migrating perspectives.
So actually, I thought it was really interesting today because it's the first time that we like worked with the journalists in a group and having a discussion and everything. So it was quite refreshing. So I just realized it is possible to working in such a group that already where you don't have to explain yourself or where everybody is from a same perspective somehow. That's really always so pleasant. I just realized it's such a different experience and such a nice experience.
Even if we're incredibly diverse, there's this feeling of belonging. We both like fell in here today, and I felt like we just got into it without like
Exactly.
It felt like it made sense.
So effortless. It's
Yes.
like, yeah.
Wow, what an amazing video and an even better outcome of the process. Guys, I wanted to ask you, how did you approach the creation of Shift magazine to ensure that the perspectives of refugees and migrants were represented in the most authentic way?
Before I start talking about this, let me introduce you to our little baby, Shift magazine. This will be available on 12th of May in Backhouse event and online as well. You can check Reframing Migrants website and you will find the online copy. If you want your hard copy, you can come to us and you can also reach out here to support or Amsterdam City Rights to get your hard copy. So when we are talking about the approach, the approach was by focusing on the new media makers that come from different backgrounds. Migrant backgrounds from these silenced communities. Mainstream media, unfortunately, I'm saying that unfortunately they are ignoring or these communities are ignored or silenced somehow on the mainstream media. We tried also to approach this by giving a good practice. They are not also silenced because they don't talk. Mm-hmm. No, they are talking and they are giving a good practices. They have their own newsrooms, they have their own podcasts, they have their own also new media makers that they trying to use the new media platforms for social change. So that's why that was our approach to talk to these people, to give these good practices to the to the European media sphere, and that's important to show that there is these people exist. They exist in the media field, but they have a different approach. They have a different perspective for talking about migrants and refugees, and that's why we was said Shift is okay, this is a new perspective for migranting magazine that should be something exists since long time ago, but we build an experience now with this magazine.
Absolutely, and talking about...
To add up to that,
go ahead.
And if you also look at the making process of it, how diverse the working group was, which all go to all corners of representativity, and I think that was really nice because there is no way that in it there were refugees, there were people who were born in Europe, people who migrated in Europe at a young age, people who have parents that have migrated for a very long time. So you see that from there there is already the tracks for it to come out in this beautiful way, babyish and cute, as Mr. Osama just said.
Absolutely. It is very cute. It is very cute, and I'm looking forward to having my own physical copy of it. But since this was a trailblazing sort of experience, what were the challenges that you have experienced in producing and in the editorial part that kind of were behind the scenes? How?
Yeah. The first challenge, in my opinion, was ensuring authentic representation for these communities. I mean, for the migrant communities, for the diaspora communities, for these minorities. That was like, we need like authentic representation. We don't want to repeat the faults of the mainstream media. That was a challenge. I mean, in the mainstream media as well, we have the lack of diversity. So when we establish or try to build a decolonized newsroom, we need to have this diversity, and that's not easy. And you have this kind of recruitment policies in the mainstream media. We are trying to challenge this way to choose your editors for this newsroom. That was also a challenge. Also, other challenges was like, what does it mean? I mean, for everyone who's gonna participate in this. So for me, I was like, we at the beginning we were okay. That was like too much discussion. What does decolonized newsroom means for each editor? That was like also a challenge, and also it's gonna reflect on the product as well. It's not only something theoretically. I mean, we will show a good practice, or we call it a best practice or a good practice, but it's a practice that helps the mainstream media, I mean, to just like see what's going on outside their bubble. I mean, so that was a challenge. We overcome these challenges like by, I mean, for the first challenge about the ensuring authentic representations and the lack of diversity, we are trying to connect to the initiative, like new media initiatives, to migrant initiatives, to like a media-led organization by the refugees and journalists from the diaspora. So we were trying to highlighting the importance of independent reporting, because like independent reporting on such an issues, like they underestimate it as like all the time, and they have guidelines in mainstream media guidelines. So we are trying to break all of these rules with our editorial or our inclusive editorial guideline, not only the stereotypes and this stigma about the reporting about the migrants and the refugees and the minorities overall.
And did you come at the end of the day to a unified sort of opinion on what decolonized newsroom is?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a challenge. It's a challenge for the dominant narratives. It's also a challenge of the legacy of the colonialism in the mainstream media newsrooms. It's also something like questioning the power dynamics on the newsrooms. We are not like we are not gonna watch this only. The power dynamics in the mainstream media is unfortunately unfair at all in terms of the migrants and the journalists from the different backgrounds. And we trying to say decolonized newsroom, giving more space for the people to take about themselves, not to let others to take about them from other mentalities or other perspectives. So we are trying to say that the decolonized newsroom is like more safe space for these people to talk about themselves without stigma, without stereotyping, without this kind of coverage that we all unfortunately see at the mainstream media in different countries in Europe. It's not only in specific country. It's a mentality, unfortunately.
Okay, and what about you, Mo?
I just like the fact that during the building process, they took every aspect of society into account, including the fact that most mainstream media are capitalistic driven, that they want to make more views to make more earning. But what about this percentage of European population that is not a target, that is not an audience because they don't agree to the way they're being portrayed? So if they can just take this, use these approaches, change the way they work, it's more earning for them, because people will be like, oh, I'm being talked about in a good way, I'm being portrayed, this is a good representation, I would like to watch this channel more often. So, but instead, they are losing Maybe they're gaining more, I don't know, but they're losing a whole set of audience. And to you, the journalist, I think this is one of the fundamental principles that many have forgotten, is the fact that journalism is about not just about being a reporter as a job opportunity, as a job, but most importantly, sharing stories, sharing news, keeping people updated. I mean, in a kind of way, upholding the pillars of society. My high school teacher told me that there are, unlike three, there are four pillars of government: the executive, the judiciary, the legislative, and the press. Because the press has the power, and unfortunately for us, for a long time, this power has been working against us. But I think this could be one of the keys to changing that.
Absolutely. And I think that what you've mentioned about press losing audiences, it's also about regaining the trust of the audiences, because this has been mentioned quite a bit over the past years, that people are losing their trust in the media overall. So stories like this, processes like your guys's, can give a positive outcome to media as a whole. Not only media about migrants and for migrants, but media as a whole for all the people who live together. Thank you so much for this wonderful panel, and sharing your experience of the decolonizing newsroom. It's an unprecedented experience and an unprecedented process. Again, just wanted to remind you that you can find Shift publication in the publication section of the Europe Day website, as well as the reframingmigrants.eu website. And you can come to Pakhuis de Zwijger in Amsterdam on May 12th and get your physical copy, because it's really nice and you should really get it.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.